Welcome to My The Astro Podcast. Let's get into it. Today is Thursday. You know what we got for Thursday? It is our Quarter Thorns and Roses Day. Let's go. Today's chapters are 31 and 32. Excited to get into these chapters for you guys. But before we do that, we have today's thread. Today's thread's pretty interesting from the title. And it is, what's an NSFW scandal in your family? All right, so let's see. All right, my dad cheated on my mom with her best friend, so they divorced. Then my dad proceeded to date the woman he cheated with for 4 years, but then they broke up. Then the woman marries my dad's best friend. Dad meets a new woman, and now the two couples are best friends and swing together. Meanwhile, my mom committed. Oh. Okay, wow. That took the darkest turn possible. Oh my God. Like it was already weird that, the dad slept with the mom's friend, and then the mom's friend then slept with the dad's friend, and then they all became friends, and then that ending of mom, ending herself. Wow. Woo! Talk about a Jesus. Okay. All right. My aunt was a hoarder, and none of us had ever been in her house. We had suspected for years that she was a lesbian, but it was never confirmed. This was my grandfather's sister, so she was born around 1913. God damn, you old. They were also very Southern and very Baptist, not exactly a coming out friendly generation or environment. She was more than a little bit weird, but in a fun way. She was always hilarious to be around and would crack jokes and made other family members clutch their pearls when she always cracked jokes and made other family members clutch their pearls. She was a world traveler and with her friend and never had kids. Her friend, who we also never met, was her sole beneficiary. Along with a cat rescue, it was always sad to see us that she never felt comfortable sharing her life with us. But I think that generation just never really felt comfortable. She died very unexpectedly after falling in the shower in the early 90s, and my mom and some of her cousins went to clean her home out. While they were there, they were going through pictures to figure out which ones of her siblings might want, and came across thousands of pictures of penises. Not real life ones, but zoomed in ones from statues, paintings, etc. From all around the world. My aunt had zoomed into just the penis on all the art. They could find no other pictures of the full piece of art. For instance, there was the David, but only his penis. No picture of the whole statue in its entirety that they could find. What the fuck? That is the weirdest thing ever. She was just like, yes, I want pictures of all the penises in the art world possible. Like, for what? Was it just like a sick kick? Was it just like it was a joking kind of thing between her and her friend? I wonder what would prompt that. You know what I mean? What would prompt you to want to take pictures of penises, but like art penis, that's so weird. What the heck? Wow. Okay. I guess so. To each its own. All right. Oh my God. My grandfather was murdered decades ago. The cops knew who did it, but they could never find the guy. My mom is the youngest of 7, and she always closed. She was always close to her brother. She said she always felt safe around him. He was a steel worker and would cuss like a sailor, but he always was a softie around us kids. Family was important to him. On his deathbed, the hospital, he asked my mom to come closer. Or at the hospital, he asked my mom to come closer and told the rest of us to leave the room. My dad took us out of the room and we waited in the hall. My mom comes out crying and pale as a sheet. My father grabs her and asks her what's wrong. She whispers something into his ear, and my dad loses all color into his face and runs down the hall to a phone. This was way before cell phones. I looked in at my uncle who was still alive. He just smiled at me and laid there. My uncle was 19 when my grandfather was murdered, and he knew the guy was that. Okay, he knew who the guy was that killed my grandfather. Jesus Christ. English must not be their first language. So he found him the same night and killed him. He buried the body in the woods on family land and could never tell a soul until he knew he was going to die himself. My dad and my mom called the police, but my uncle died before they got there. Later, they dug in the spot he told my mom, and they found a skeleton. My mom and dad never talked about it again, and they would get pissed if my brothers or sisters would bring it up. My parents are both gone now, as are all of my siblings. We cousins never talk about it. His daughters deny it totally. Even after hearing that, I still loved my uncle and never thought any different of him. That's crazy. Dang, imagine holding that kind of secret for years. I'm talking years on years you're holding this secret. And then it's finally time to tell them. Man, that's crazy. Shit, I mean, your uncle's a thug. I ain't gonna lie to you, man. And it's weird how they were like, oh, let's call the cops. Like, what? For what? The man's on his deathbed. You know what I mean? Like, who cares at this point? The cops would get there and just be like, so do you want us to like arrest him? Like, you know, like, what's the point in calling the cops at this point? Like my man's is about to die. Sure, he committed a murder, but I mean, at this point, who cares? You know, I don't know. I have no clue. That's crazy, though. The fact that he held that secret for that long, though. That's what's crazy to me. Damn. My hyper-religious, super conservative godfather, 75 male, is a doctor. He worked as a gyno in a public hospital geared towards those in need. He had a child out of wedlock with one of his patients. Oh, man. I mean, when you're looking at coochies all day, I'm sure one of them is going to look good enough for you to be like, damn, girl. So what can I do to get up in this? You know what I mean? Like, I'm just saying. The family found out when the child was already in her teens. My godmother was suspicious about a few monthly expenses that seemed to be increasing and decided to investigate. So wait a minute, my man was married. Whoa. So my man was married. He had a patient who was a side chick. Wow. And he had a baby with this said side chick. That's crazy. Okay. All right. Oh, goodness gracious. All right. He was paying a buttload of child support, like hush money. She was, of course, devastated. His son-in-law, 50 male, who saw him as the inspirational alpha father, leader, man of God figure, and always wanted to follow his lead, legitimately had a mental breakdown when everyone found out, and he ended up in a psych ward for 3 months. God damn. Bro, it ain't that serious. I mean, look, I get that, you know, your dad might have not been what you wanted him to be, you know, or what he made himself out to be. But I mean, damn, you ain't got to go crazy over it. Like, shit. That's wild to me. You know? Like, god damn. So, hey, just the fact that, like, he was married and had this, oh, God. I mean, again, you're looking at coochies all day. I mean, there's bound to be one where you're going to be like, yo, what it do? You know what I mean? I'm just saying. All right, my great-grandmother left my great-grandmother left my great-grandfather, and they had 2 kids because she didn't like being a mom. Whoa. While she was gone, she literally started working in a whorehouse. A little under 2 years after she left, she came back and dropped off a kid at my grandfather's to take care of. 6 years after that, she came back, took my great aunt and gave her to her biological father. I believe a year after that, she came back and decided she was ready to be a mom, to my grandmother and great aunt. My great grandfather and her were together for the rest of their lives. He took care of her when she was deathly ill to the day she died over 40 years later. My second great aunt tracked down my great grandfather in her early 20s and sort of lived the rest of her life like she had 2 dads. Needless to say that family gatherings could be tense at times. That's wild how she was just like, she had 2 kids with this dude and was just like, nah, I don't want to be with you anymore. She went to a whorehouse and got fucked a bunch for money, had a baby, gave the baby to her ex dude, and was just like, oh yeah, I know you're taking care of these 2 kids, but can you take care of this kid? Then a year later, she's just like, you know what? I want to take my baby back and I'm going to give it to the dad. And then she flumps and does what she's going to do. And then she comes back and she's like, you know what? I want to be a mom. And like, let's be a family. And so then now they're all a family and everything is great. Like, what in the hell is going on here? Like, bruh, what? This is crazy to me. And this was back in the day. This wasn't no like, you know, this is like early, you know, 90s, early 2000s, 2010s type. Nah. This was like back a day. Probably at least in the 50s, the 60s, somewhere around there. But that's wild. That is wild. And the fact that like she came back and was like, oh yeah, I want to be a mom, so let's, you know, be a family of our 3 kids. And then he stayed with her the rest of his life. Like, that's wild. That is wild. I mean, you would never, and I mean ever, see something like that today. Man. Damn. All right. Well, that's interesting. Not a scandal by today's standards, but one uncle and aunt's marriage was what used to be called a lavender marriage. Okay. They were both gay and married for cover. Oh. I mean, well, technically, yeah, okay. I mean, the only way it would like be a scandal nowadays is if they're like highly religious. You know what I mean? They're looked at as like a, say it was like a preacher's daughter, or it was like a dude's a priest or something like that. You know what I mean? Like he's highly religious, and you know, and he has a wife just to kind of look good in front of all the people, and then they kind of realize, oh nigga, you're gay. Like, what the fuck? Yeah. They both came out when in their 50s, as times had changed, although they both still lived together as friends. That, man, imagine getting fake married to somebody. You know what I mean? Like, you get fake married to somebody just because like she's lesbian and you're gay, and then like later on you're just like, oh shit, it's cool to be, you know, to be gay, and it's cool to be everything, and then they're just like, fuck it, let's just still live together. Like, okay, damn, like, you know what I mean? Like, you literally found a best friend that like covered you in everything, you know? Okay. I'm sure they at least smashed once. Yeah, I mean, I don't believe they didn't smash at least once. Like, come on now. All right. Not sure if it's really NSFW, but I had an uncle, let's call him Ralph. Now, Ralph was married to Alice. They were extremely toxic together. They got drunk and literally got into physical fights with each other. One day, Ralph posts on social media how sad he is that Alice finally left him. Yada, yada. No surprise there, and often other members of the family would say, oh yeah, we saw Aunt Alice at the Piggly Wiggly. All right, she's a teacher in another state now. So we all thought that's what happened because there were these constant sightings of Aunt Alice. Fast forward 7-ish years later, and Uncle Ralph is diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer. He was a chronic smoker, so no surprise there. They did all they could to save him and finally told him they would be surprised if he survived another month or so. He called a family meeting for a final goodbye, and that's when he admits to everyone, and I mean the whole family was packed into this guy's hospital room, including a 13-year-old Stormtrooper Bob, okay? Anyway, he admits that 7-ish years ago, he murdered Aunt Alice. No way. Buried her body in the woods where he liked to hunt, and that was that. He passed the following week. The police did find the remains of Aunt Alice, was put to rest. That's my family scandal in a nutshell. Whoa. So this man was pretending that she was alive the whole time, and he was like, oh, she left me. I'm so heartbroken. This is the saddest day of my life. Oh my goodness. Yada, yada, yada. Not knowing the whole time she was dead. Wow. By his hand. That's crazy. Oh, I'm just surprised that with as abusive as their relationship was, obviously he said they got into physical altercations. The fact that it was so physical the way it was, I'm surprised no one kind of thought that. You know what I mean? Maybe they did, but they just couldn't prove it. But, still, it's just like, in that kind of situation, you really wouldn't put it past. Like, honestly, if I heard that, knowing how like physical their relationship would get, I would just be like, that's not surprising. You know what I mean? Just if you really knew them and knew their relationship, you would be like, that's not surprising. But obviously to us on the outside, we're like, yo, that's crazy. I'm just surprised, like, how the hell did he get away with it for so long? You know what I mean? Like, how do you get away with something like that for so long? There are people who do commit murders and they don't get away with it for that long, I mean, I guess maybe that was, that was maybe back a day before, cops really had the forensic technology that they have now. But yeah, damn, dude. Damn, that's crazy. All right. Biological father and grandfather were serial cheats. I was always told they whored around, but after I joined a DNA ancestry service and saw 42 half aunts, uncles, and 20 half siblings, it really sunk in. Yo, they were busting nuts. God damn. They were both military, so you can track where they were located based on birthdays of the kids. That's crazy. Imagine your dad and your grandpa just got bare kids all over the place. Just mad loads of kids all over the world. Whoa. And you just got half siblings in Japan and Germany and, in France and the UK and Australia. Like, you just got mad siblings like that. That would be wild. Oh, man, they just all look you up on Facebook or whatever, and they're just like, hey, I think we have the same dad. Like, what the fuck? That's crazy. That's crazy. Damn. I would love to know if any of those other kids like reached out to them, and just being like, hey, guess what? We're siblings, and they live like halfway across the fucking world and shit. That would be crazy. Just getting like a message from a random Chinese dude, or, getting a random message from a random German guy or something like that. And you're just like, who the fuck is this? And they're just like, oh, guten Tag, we have the same dad. Like, you know what I mean? That should be crazy. All right. So my biological father had an affair with my mother's best friend and our neighbor. Later in my life, he wrote a self-help book about parental alienation, blaming his kids for his mistakes. Wow. That's crazy. That's crazy. He was fucking his wife's best friend and the neighbor, and then wrote a self-help book about how his kids made him commit infidelity like that. That is wild, bro. This man said, I'm not only going to gaslight my wife and children, I'm going to gaslight the whole world with my book. The whole world. Oh my God. Like, feel bad for me. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy. Man. You got to be a diabolical madman for some shit like that. All right. An in-law went to see a band and went missing for a few weeks. He wasn't missing. He just went to his mistress's house after the gig and decided that his house, his wife, and his family were not really for him anymore. Wow. So he went to a concert with a side piece and he thought to himself, you know what? I like living here. My wife and my children and all that other stuff I had going on over there, fuck it. Don't want it anymore. I'm just going to leave it behind. That's crazy. Like, what? What? It's so crazy to me how people will marry somebody, have kids with them, be with them, for years on end, get a house, do all this stuff, and then meet someone else and then just decide, I don't want that anymore. And it's like, what? What's the point? Like, seriously, what's the point? It's like being a bodybuilder for 20 years, you know what I mean? And you were on a strict diet routine, working out, you know what I mean? You really kept yourself in shape for like 20 years. And then all of a sudden you just decided to just drop it and be fat. And it's like, for what? For what? This is your life. This has been your life. Okay. I don't know. I'll never understand that, if I'm being honest with you. Like, you do all of this, you make so many strides in life, and then you just decide, I'm done. Like, wow. Like, there's no repercussions. That's crazy. Oh my God. All right, I'm going to do two more. My cousin at the time in her 20s married a guy in his 40s who came with an adult kid, a son 18 at the time, from a previous relationship. My cousin pumped out a couple kids with this man. A couple years pass. My cousin is caught in bed with her husband's adult son. Whoa! My man was living the stepmom fantasy. God damn. Now in his mid-20s while my cousin was in her 30s. Cousin and husband divorced. Cousin keeps custody of their children. Cousin keeps seeing the adult son of her ex-husband. That's crazy. That's crazy. My man said, hey, yo, Pornhub come to life. Couple years pass. They pump out a few kids. The dude is now a stepfather to his own half-siblings. That's crazy. That is crazy, bro. Oh my, you're a dad to your dad's kids. Like, what? Wow. Oh my God. The dude is now a stepfather to his own half-siblings, and his own biological kids are half-siblings to his own half-siblings. We don't talk about my cousin anymore. Facts. Facts. Like, what the fuck is she doing, bro? Like, she said, I'm going to find that loophole to incest. Like, what the fuck is going on here, man? God damn. He is the dad to his dad's kids, and his kids are step kids. Our step siblings to their stepdad. Like, what the fuck? It's so much going on in there. It just don't make sense. It just don't make sense. There's so much going on in that. Like, what the hell? I mean, hey, is what it is, bro. My great aunt was married. Oh, this is going to be our last one for this thread, okay? My great aunt was married 5 times. Each of the first 4 died from various causes: car accident, heart attack, injury while working on their property, unknown causes in his sleep. Yeah, this woman's a black widow, man. Goddamn. The 5th committed slide. Oh, man. He ended himself. The whole family believes she somehow directly or indirectly killed each of them in turn. I only knew her when I was a little kid, but she was certainly bitter and mean-spirited. So, I want to say the car accident, she probably cut that nigga's brakes. The heart attack, I'm sure there's some shit that induces heart attacks. I'm sure. Maybe like a plant or something, you know what I mean? Like some wolf's bane or some shit. Injury while working on their property. I'm sure she sabotaged something, you know what I mean? So it'd fall on top of that motherfucker. And then the unknown causes in sleep. Yeah, come on, man. Yeah. Hey, come on, man. You don't have 4 happy accidents. Like, that just don't happen, bro. You just don't. You don't have 4 happy, unfortunate accidents. That doesn't happen. You had to have some hand in at least 3 of them. At least. Now, the dude who, ended himself, that must have been an internal battle he was dealing with. Either that or he was so sick and tired of her shit. He said, the sweet release of death is better than living the rest of my life with her. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I guarantee you she was the type of woman where she felt like she don't do nothing wrong and it's always the guy's fault when the common denominator is you. Like, let's be real here. That common denominator is you. Like, what the fuck is going on here? But, hey. Is what it is, man. Is what it is. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over, expecting a different result. Hey. Shit. All right. That's going to go ahead and be the end of today's thread. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that juicy thread. That was a thread. Fuck. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that thread, man. That was wild. Before we get into According Thorns and Roses, chapters 31 and 32, I'm going to hop into announcements. And then we'll get right into our book. So patreon.com/MyLastPodcast. Get an exclusive episode every single Friday, as well as being able to send in your scenarios to be featured on the Tuesday and Sunday shows. If you guys, are on the fence about the Patreon and whatnot, don't worry. I got you. There's a link down in the description to all the free Patreon episodes that we've done. You can go ahead and check out those and see if it's for you. And if it's for you, hop on in there and become a member. If you are an audio listener, keep downloading the podcast as well as rating us 5 stars. If you haven't already, that helps out a lot. And guess what? It's for free. That's amazing, right? If you want to help us out even more on the free 99 side of things, go ahead and follow us on Instagram, TikTok, as well as the YouTubes. It helps out a lot, and I appreciate all of the support you guys have been showing over this past year. It's been great. It's been wonderful, man. I love you guys all. Thank you for the support. Now let's get into our book for today. Chapters 31 and 32.
Chapter 31. The ball was a blur of waltzing and preening, of bejeweled aristos, of wine and toasts in my honor. I lingered at Nesta's side because she seemed to do a good job of scaring off the 2 curious suitors who wanted to know more about my fortune. But I tried to smile, if only for Elaine, who flitted about the room, personally greeting each guest and dancing with all their important sons. But I kept thinking about what Nesta had said, about saving Tamlin. I'd known something was wrong. I'd known he was in trouble. Not just with the blight on Prithian, but also that the forces gathering to destroy him were deadly, and yet I'd stopped looking for answers, stopped fighting it, glad, so selfishly glad to be able to set down that savage, wild part of me that had only survived hour to hour. I'd let him send me home. I hadn't tried harder to piece together the information I'd gathered about the blight or Amarantha. I hadn't tried to save him. I hadn't even told him I loved him. And Lucian had known it, too, and shown it in his bitter words on my last day, his disappointment in me. 2 a.m, and yet the party was showing no signs of slowing. My father held court with several other merchants and aristo men to whom I had been introduced, but whose names I'd instantly forgotten. Elaine was laughing among a circle of beautiful friends, flushed and brilliant. Nesta had silently left at midnight, and I didn't bother to say goodbye as I finally slipped upstairs. The following afternoon, bleary-eyed and quiet, we all gathered at the lunch table. I thanked my sister and father for the party, and dodged my father's inquiries regarding whether any of his friends' sons had caught my eye. The summer heat had arrived, and I propped my chin on a fist as I fanned myself. I'd slept fitfully in the heat last night. It was never too hot or too cold at Tamlin's estate. "I'm thinking of buying the better land," my father was saying to Elaine, who was the only one of us listening to him. "I've heard a rumor it'll go up for sale soon since none of the family survived, and it would be a good investment property. Perhaps one of you girls might build a house on it when you're ready." Elaine nodded interestedly, but I blinked. "What happened to the Betters?" "Oh, it was awful," Elaine said. "Their house burned down and everyone died. Well, they couldn't find Claire's body, but—" She looked down at her plate. "It happened in the dead of night. The family, their servants, everyone. The day before you came home to us, actually." "Claire Better," I said slowly. "Our friend, remember?" Elaine said. I nodded, feeling Nesta's eyes on me. No, it couldn't be possible. It had to be a coincidence. Because the alternative— I had given that name to Rhysand, and he had not forgotten it. My stomach turned over, and I fought against the nausea that roiled within me. "Feyre?" my father asked. I put a shaking hand over my eyes, breathing in. What had happened? Not just at the Betters, but at home, in Prithian. "Feyre?" my father said again, and Nesta hissed at him, "Quiet!" I pushed back against the guilt, the disgust and terror. I had to get answers. Had to know if it had been a coincidence, or if I might yet be able to save Claire. And if something had happened here in the mortal realm, then the Spring Court, then those creatures Tamlin had been so frightened of, the blight that had infected magic, their lands. Fairies. They had come over the wall and left no trace behind. I lowered my hand and looked at Nesta. "You must listen very carefully," I said to her, swallowing hard. "Everything I have told you must remain a secret. You do not come looking for me. You do not speak my name again to anyone." "What are you talking about, Feyre?" My father gaped at me from the end of the table. Elaine glanced between us, shifting in her seat. But Nesta held my gaze, unflinching. "I think something very bad might be happening in Prithian," I said softly. I'd never learned what warning signs Tamlin had instilled in their glamours to prod my family to run, but I wasn't going to risk relying solely on them. Not when Claire had been taken, her family murdered, because of me. Bile burned in my throat. "Prithian?" my father and Elaine blurted. But Nesta held up a hand to silence them. I went on. "If you won't leave, then hire guards. Hire scouts to watch the wall, the forest, the village too." I rose from my seat. "The first sign of danger, the first rumor you hear of the wall being breached or even something being strange, you get on a ship and go. You sail far away, as far south as you can get, to some place the fairies would never desire." My father and Elaine began blinking, as if clearing some fog from their minds, as if emerging from a deep sleep. But Nesta followed me into the hall, up the stairs. "The betters," she said. "That was meant to be us. But you gave them a fake name, those wicked fairies who threatened your High Lord." I nodded. I could see the plans calculating in her eyes. "Is there going to be an invasion?" "I don't know. I don't know what's happening. I was told that there was a kind of sickness that had made their powers weaken or go wild, a blight on the land that had damaged the safety of their borders and could kill people if it struck badly enough. They said it was surging again, on the move. The last I heard, it wasn't near enough to harm our lands. But if the spring court is about to fall, then the blight has to be getting close, and Tamlin was one of the last bastions keeping the other courts in check, the deadly courts, and I think he's in danger." I entered my room and began peeling off my gown. My sister helped me, then opened the wardrobe and pulled out a heavy tunic and pants and boots. I slipped into them and was braiding back my hair when she said, "We don't need you here, Feyre. Do not look back." I tugged on my boots and went for the hunting knives I'd discreetly acquired while here. "Father once told you to never come back," Nesta said, "and I'm telling you now, we can take care of ourselves." Once I might have thought it was an insult, but now I understood what a gift she was offering me. I sheathed the knives at my side and slung a quiver of arrows across my back, none of them ash, before scooping up my bow. "They can lie," I said, giving her information I hoped she would never need. "Fairies can lie, and iron doesn't bother them one bit, but ash would? That seems to work. Take my money and buy a damned grove of it for Elaine to tend." Nesta shook her head, clutching her wrist, the bracelet of iron still there. "What do you think you can even do to help? He's a High Lord, you're just a human." That wasn't an insult either, a question from a coolly calculating mind. "I don't care," I admitted, at the door now which I flung open. "But I've got to try." Nesta remained in my room. She would not say goodbye. She hated farewells as much as I did. But I turned to my sister and said, "There is a better world, Nesta. There is a better world out there waiting for you to find it. And if I ever get the chance, if things are ever better, safer, I will find you again." It was all I could offer her. But Nesta squared her shoulders. "Don't bother. I don't think I'd be particularly fond of fairies." I raised a brow. She went on with a slight shrug. "Try to send word once it's safe. And if it ever is, Father and Elaine can have this place. I think I'd like to see what else is out there, what a woman might do with a fortune and a good name." No limits, I thought. There were no limits to what Nesta might do, what she might make of herself once she found a place to call her own. I prayed I would be lucky enough to someday see it. Elaine, to my surprise, had a horse, a satchel of food, and supplies ready when I hurried down the stairs. My father was nowhere in sight, but Elaine threw her arms around me and, holding tightly, said, I remember all of it now. I wrapped my arms around her. Be on your guard, all of you. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I would have liked to see the continent with you, Feyre. I smiled at my sister, memorizing her lovely face, and wiped her tears away. Maybe someday, I said. Another promise that I'd be lucky to keep. Elaine was still crying as I spurred my horse and galloped down the drive. I didn't have it in me to say goodbye to my father once more. I rode all day, and stopped only when it was too dark for me to see. Due north. That's where I would start and go until I hit the wall. I had to get back, had to see what had happened, had to tell Tamlin everything that was in my heart before it was too late. I rode all of the second day, slept fitfully, and was off before first light. On and on, through the summer forest, lush and dense and humming, until an absolute silence fell. I slowed my horse to a careful walk and scanned the brush and trees ahead for any sign, any ripple. There was nothing. Nothing, and then my horse bucked and shook her head, and it was all I could do to stay in the saddle as she refused to go forward. But still there was nothing. No marker. Yet when I dismounted, hardly breathing as I put a hand out, I found that I could not pass. There, cleaving through the forest, was an invisible wall. But the fairies came and went through it, through holes, rumor claimed. So I led my horse down the line, tapping the wall every so often to make sure I hadn't veered away. It took me 2 days, and the night between them was more terrifying than any I'd experienced at the spring court. 2 days before I spied the mossy stones placed across from each other, a faint whorl carved into them both. A gate. This time, when I mounted my horse and steered her between them, she obeyed. Magic stung my nostrils, zapping until my horse bucked again, but we were through. I knew these trees. I rode in silence, an arrow nocked and ready, the threats lurking in the forest far greater than those in the woods I'd just left. Tamlin might be furious. He might command me to turn around and go home. But I would tell him that I was going to help. Tell him that I loved him and would fight for him however I could, even if I had to tie him down to make him listen. I became so intent on contemplating how I might convince him not to start roaring that I didn't immediately notice the quiet. How the birds didn't sing, even as I drew closer to the manor itself. How the hedges of the estate looked in need of a trim. By the time I reached the gates, my mouth had gone dry. The gates were open, but the iron had been bent out of shape, as if mighty hands had wrenched them apart. Every step of the horse's hooves was too loud on the gravel path, and my stomach dropped further when I beheld the wide-open front doors. One of them hung at an angle, ripped off its top hinge. I dismounted, arrow still at the ready. But there was no need. Empty. It was utterly empty here. Like a tomb. "Tam?" I called. I bounded up the front steps and into the house. I rushed inside, swearing as I slid on a piece of broken porcelain, the remnants of a vase. Slowly, I turned in the front hall. It looked as if an army had marched through. Tapestries hung in shreds, the marble banister was fractured, and the chandeliers lay broken on the ground, reduced to mounds of shattered crystal. "Tamlin?" I shouted. Nothing. The windows had all been blown out. "Lucian!" No one answered. "Tam!" My voice echoed through the house, mocking me. Alone in the wreckage of the manor, I sank to my knees. He was gone. Chapter 32. I gave myself a minute, just 1 minute, to kneel in the remnants of the entry hall. Then I eased to my feet, careful not to disturb any of the shattered glass or wood, or blood. There were splatters of it everywhere, along with small puddles and smears down the gouged walls. Another forest, I told myself, another set of tracks. Slowly, I moved across the floor, tracing the information left. It had been a vicious fight, and from the blood patterns, most of the damage to the house had been done during the fight, not afterward. The crushed glass and footprints came and went from the front to the back of the house, as if the whole place had been surrounded. The intruders had needed to force their way in through the front door. They'd just completely shattered the doors to the garden. No bodies, I kept repeating to myself. There were no bodies and not much gore. They had to be alive. Tamlin had to be alive. Because if he were dead... I rubbed my face, taking a shuddering breath. I wouldn't let myself get that far. My hands shook as I paused before the dining room doors, both barely hanging on their hinges. I couldn't tell if the damage was from his lashing out after Reason's arrival the day before my departure, or if someone else had caused it. The giant table was in pieces, the windows smashed, the curtains in shreds. But no blood. There was no blood here. And from the prints in the shards of glass, I studied the trail across the floor. It had been disturbed, but I could make out 2 sets, large and side by side, leading from where the table had been. As if Tamlin and Lucian had been sitting here as the attack happened and walked out without a fight. If I was right, then they were alive. I traced the steps to the doorway, squatting for a moment to work through the churned-up shards, dirt, and blood. They'd been met here by multiple sets of prints and headed toward the garden. Debris crunched from down the hall. I drew my hunting knife and ducked farther into the dining room, scanning for a place to hide, but everything was in pieces. With no other option, I lunged behind the open door. I pressed a hand over my mouth to keep from breathing too loudly and peered through the crack between the door and the wall. Something limped into the room and sniffed. I could see only its back, cloaked in a plain cape, medium height. All it had to do to find me was shut the door. Perhaps if it came far enough into the dining room, I could slip out, but that would require leaving my hiding spot. Perhaps it would just look around and then leave. The figure sniffed again, and my stomach clenched. It could smell me. I dared a better glance at it, hoping to find a weakness, a spot for my knife, if things came down to it. The figure turned slightly toward me. I cried out, and the figure screeched as I shoved away the door. "Alice!" She gaped at me, a hand on her heart, her usual brown dress torn and dirty, her apron gone entirely. Not bloodied, though. Nothing save for the slight limp that favored her right ankle as she rushed for me, her tree-bark skin bleaching birch white. "You can't be here." She took in my knife, the bow and quiver. "You were told to stay away." "Is he alive?" "Yes, but..." My knees buckled at the onslaught of relief. "And Lucian?" "Alive as well. But tell me what happened. Tell me everything." I kept an eye on the window, listening to the manor and grounds around us. Not a sound. Alice grasped my arm and pulled me from the room. She didn't speak as we hurried through the empty, too quiet halls, all of them wrecked and bloodied, but no bodies. Either they'd been hauled away or... I didn't let myself consider it as we entered the kitchen. A fire had scorched the giant room, and it was little more than cinders and blackened stone. After sniffing about and listening for any signs of danger, Alice released me. "What are you doing here?" "I had to come back. I thought something had gone wrong. I couldn't stay away. I had to help." "He told you not to come back," Alice snapped. "Where is he?" Alice covered her face with her long, bony hands, and her fingertips grappling into the upper edge of her mask as if trying to tear it from her face. But the mask remained, and Alice sighed as she lowered her tree bark hands. "She took him," she said, and my blood went cold. "She took him to her court under the mountain." "Who?" But I already knew the answer. "Amarantha," Alice whispered, and glanced again around the kitchen as if fearful that speaking her name would summon her. "Why? And who is she? What is she? Please, please, just tell me. Just give me the truth." Alice shuddered. "You want the truth, girl? Then here it is. She took him for the curse. Because the 7 times 7 years were over, and he hadn't shattered her curse. She summoned all the High Lords to her court this time, to make them watch her break him." "What is she? Well, what curse?" A curse she had put on this place, a curse that I had failed to even see. "Amarantha is High Queen of this land, the High Queen of Prythian," Alice breathed, her eyes wide with some memory of horror. "But the 7 High Lords rule Prythian equally. There's no High Queen." "That's how it used to be, how it's always been, until 100 years ago when she appeared in these lands as an emissary from Highburn." Alice grabbed a large satchel that she must have left by the door. It was already half full of what looked like clothes and supplies. As she began sifting through the ruined kitchen, gathering up knives and any food that had survived, I wondered at the information the Suriel had given me of a wicked fairy king who had spent centuries resenting the treaty he'd been forced to sign, and who had sent out his deadliest commanders to infiltrate the other fairy kingdoms and courts to see if they felt as he did, to see if they might consider reclaiming the human lands for themselves. I leaned against one of the soot-stained walls. "She went from court to court," Alice went on, turning an apple over in her hands as she inspected it, deemed it good enough, and stuffed it into the bag. "Charming the High Lords with talk of more trade between Highburn and Prythian, more communication, more sharing of assets. The never-fading flower, they called her. And for 50 years she lived here as a courtier bound to no court, making amends, she claimed, for her own actions and the actions of Highburn during the war." "She fought in the war against mortals?" Alice paused her gathering. "Her story is legend among our kind. Legend and nightmare. She was the King of Highburn's most lethal general. She fought on the front lines, slaughtering humans and any high fae and fairies who dared defend them. But she had a younger sister, Clythia, who fought at her side, as vicious and wretched as she, until Clythia fell in love with a mortal warrior, Jorian." Alice loosed a shaking sigh. "Jorian commanded mighty human armies, but Clythia still secretly sought him out, still loved him with an unrelenting madness. She was too blind to realize that Jorian was using her for information about Amarantha's forces. Amarantha suspected, but could not persuade Clythia to leave him, and could not bring herself to kill him, not when it would cause her sister such pain." Alice clicked her tongue and began opening the cabinets, scanning their ravaged insides. "Amarantha delighted in torture and killing, and yet she loved her sister enough to stay her hand." "What happened?" I breathed. Oh, Jurian betrayed Clythia. After months of stomaching being her lover, he got the information he needed, then tortured and butchered her, crucifying her with ash wood so she couldn't move while he did it. He left the pieces of her for Amarantha to find. They say Amarantha's wrath could have brought down the skies themselves had her king not ordered her to stand down. But she and Jurian had their final confrontation later, and since then Amarantha has hated humans with a rage you cannot imagine. Alice found what looked to be a jar of preserves and added it to the satchel. After the two sides made the treaty, Alice said, now going through the drawers, she butchered her own slaves rather than free them. I blanched. But centuries later, the High Lords believed her when she told them that the death of her sister had changed her, especially when she opened trade lines between our two territories. The High Lords never knew that those same ships that brought over Hibernian goods also brought over her own personal forces. The King of Hybern didn't know either. But we all soon learned that, in those 50 years she was here, she had decided she wanted Prythian for her own, to begin amassing power and using our lands as a launching point to one day destroy your world once and for all, with or without her king's blessing. So 49 years ago, she struck. She knew that even with her personal army she could never conquer the 7 High Lords by numbers or power alone. But she was also cunning and cruel, and she waited until they absolutely trusted her, until they gathered at a ball in her honor, and that night she slipped a potion stolen from the King of Hybern's unholy spell book into their wine. Once they drank, the High Lords were prone, their magic laid bare, and she stole their powers from where they originated inside their bodies, plucked them out as if she were taking an apple from its branch, leaving them with only the basest elements of their magic. Your Tamlin, what you saw of him here was a shade of what he used to be, the power that he used to command. And with the High Lord's power so greatly decreased, Amarantha wrested control of Prythian from them in a matter of days. For 49 years we have been her slaves. For 49 years she has been biding her time, waiting for the right moment to break the treaty and take your lands, and all human territories beyond it. I wished there were a stool, a bench, a chair for me to slump into. Alice slammed shut the final drawer and limped for the pantry. Now they call her the Deceiver, she who trapped the 7 High Lords and built her palace beneath the sacred mountain in the heart of our land. Alice paused before the pantry door and covered her face again, taking a few steadying breaths. The sacred mountain, that bald, monstrous peak I'd spotted in the mural in the library all those months ago. But the sickness in the lands, Tamlin said that the blight took their power. She is the sickness in these lands, Alice snapped, lowering her hands and entering the pantry. There is no blight but her. The borders were collapsing because she laid them to rubble. She found it amusing to send her creatures to attack our lands, to test whatever strength Tamlin had left. If the blight was Amarantha, then the threat to the human realm. She was the threat to the human realm. Alice emerged from the pantry, her arms full of various root vegetables. You could have been the one to stop her. Her eyes were hard upon me, and she bared her teeth. They were alarmingly sharp. She shoved the turnips and beets into the bag. You could have been the one to free him and his power, had you not been so blind to your own heart. Humans, she spat. I lifted my hands, exposing my palms to her. I didn't know. You couldn't know, Alice said bitterly, her laugh harsh as she entered the pantry again. It was part of Tamlin's curse. My head swam, and I pressed myself further against the wall. What was? I fought the rising hitch in my voice. What was his curse? What did she do to him? Alice yanked remaining spice jars off the pantry shelf. Tamlin and Amarantha knew each other before. His family had long been tied to Hybern. During the war, the Spring Court allied with Hybern to keep the humans enslaved. So his father, who was a fickle and vicious lord, was very close to the king of Hybern, to Amarantha. Tamlin as a child often accompanied him on trips to Hybern, and he met Amarantha in the process. Tamlin had once said to me that he would fight to protect someone's freedom, that he would never allow slavery. Had it been solely because of shame for his own legacy, or because he'd come to somehow know what it was to be enslaved? Amarantha eventually grew to desire Tamlin, to lust for him with her entire wicked heart. But he'd heard stories from others about the war and knew what Amarantha and his father and the Hybern king had done to fairies and humans alike. What she did to Jurian as punishment for her sister's death. He was wary of her when she came here, despite her attempts to lure him into her bed, and kept his distance right until she stole his powers. Lucian was sent to her as Tamlin's emissary to try to treat for peace between them. Bile rose in my throat. She refused, and Lucian told her to go back to the shithole she'd crawled out of. She took his eye as punishment, carved it out with her own fingernail, then scarred his face. She sent him back so bloody that Tamlin, the High Lord, vomited when he saw his friend. I couldn't let myself imagine what state Lucian had been in then if it had made Tamlin sick. Alice tapped on her mask, the metal pinging beneath her nails. After that, she hosted a masquerade under the mountain for herself. All the courts were present. A party, she said, to make amends for what she'd done to Lucian, and a masquerade so he didn't have to reveal the horrible scarring on his face. The entire Spring Court was to attend, even the servants, and to wear masks. To honor Tamlin's shape-shifting powers, she said. He was willing to try to end the conflict without slaughter, and he agreed to go, to bring all of us. I pressed my hands against the stone wall behind me, savoring its coolness, its steadiness. Pausing in the center of the kitchen, Alice set down her satchel, now full of food and supplies. When all were assembled, she claimed that peace could be had if Tamlin joined her as her lover and consort. But when she tried to touch him, he refused to let her near, not after what she'd done to Lucian. He said, in front of everyone that night, that he would sooner take a human to his bed, sooner marry a human than ever touch her. She might have let it go had he not then said that her own sister had preferred a human's company to hers, that her own sister had chosen Jurian over her. I winced, already knowing what Alice would say as she braced her hands on her hips and went on. You can guess how well that went over with Amarantha. But she told Tamlin that she was in a generous mood, told him she'd give him a chance to break the spell she'd put upon him to steal his power. He spat in her face and she laughed. She said he had 7 times 7 years before she claimed him, before he had to join her under the mountain. If he wanted to break her curse, he need only find a human girl willing to marry him. But not any girl, a human with ice in her heart, with hatred for our kind. A human girl willing to kill a fairy. The ground rocked beneath me, and I was grateful for the wall I leaned against. Worse, the fairy she killed had to be one of his men, sent across the wall by him like lambs to slaughter. The girl could only be brought here to be courted if she killed one of his men in an unprovoked attack. Killed him for hatred alone, just as Jurian had done to Clythia, so he could understand her sister's pain. The treaty? That was a lie. There was no provision for that in the treaty. You can kill as many innocent fairies as you want and never suffer the consequences. You just killed Andress, sent out by Tamlin as that day's sacrifice." Andress was looking for a cure, Tamlin had said. Not for some magical blight, but a cure to save Prithian from Amarantha, a cure for this curse. The wolf, Andress, had just stared at me before I killed him. Let me kill him, so it could begin this chain of events, so that Tamlin might stand a chance of breaking the spell. And if Tamlin had sent Andress across the wall, knowing he might very well die... Oh, Tamlin. Alice stooped to gather up a butter knife, twisted and bent, and carefully straightened out the blade. It was all a cruel joke, a clever punishment to Amarantha. You humans loathe and fear fairies so much it would be impossible. Impossible for the same girl who slaughtered a fairy in cold blood to then fall in love with one. But the spell on Tamlin could only be broken if she did just that before the 49 years were over. If that girl said to his face that she loved him and meant it with her entire heart. Amarantha knows humans are preoccupied with beauty, and thus bound the masks to all our faces, to his face, so it would be more difficult to find a girl willing to look beyond the mask, beyond his fairy nature and to the soul beneath. Then she bound us so we couldn't say a word about the curse, not a single word. We could hardly tell you a thing about our world, about our fate. He couldn't tell you. None of us properly could. The lies about the blight, that was the best he could do, the best we could all do. But I can tell you now, it means the game is over to her. She pocketed the knife. When she first cursed him, Tamlin sent one of his men across the wall every day. To the woods, to farms, all disguised as wolves to make it more likely for one of your kind to want to kill them. If they came back, it was with stories of human girls who ran and screamed and begged, who didn't even lift a hand. When they didn't come back, Tamlin's bond with them as their lord and master told him they'd been killed by others. Human hunters, older women perhaps. For 2 years he sent them out, day after day, having to pick who crossed the wall. When all but a dozen of them were left, it broke him so badly he stopped, called it all off. And since then, Tamlin has been here, defending his borders as chaos and disorder ruled in the other courts under Amarantha's thumb. The other High Lords fought back too. 40 years ago she executed 3 of them and most of their families for banding together against her. Open rebellion? What courts? I straightened, taking a step away from the wall. Perhaps I might find allies among them to help me save Tamlin. The Day Court, Summer Court, and Winter Court. And no, it didn't even get far enough to be considered an open rebellion. She used the High Lord's powers to bind us to the land. So the rebel lords tried calling for aid from the other Fae territories, using as messengers whatever humans were foolish enough to enter our lands. Most of them young women who worshipped us like gods. The children of the blessed. They had indeed made it over the wall, but not to be brides. I was too battered by what I'd heard to grieve for them, rage for them. But Amarantha caught them all before they left these shores, and you can imagine how it ended for those girls. Afterward, once Amarantha also butchered the rebellious High Lords, their successors were too terrified to tempt her wrath again. And where are they now? Are they allowed to live on their lands like Tamlin was? No. She keeps them and their entire courts under the mountain, where she can torment them as she pleases. Others, if they swear allegiance, if they grovel and serve her, she allows them a bit more freedom to come and go under the mountain as they will. Our court was only allowed to remain here until Tamlin's curse ran out, but... Alice shivered. That's why you keep your nephews in hiding. to keep them away from this, I said, glancing at the full satchel at her feet. Alice nodded, and as she went to right the overturned work table, I moved to help her, both of us grunting at the weight. My sister and I served in the summer court, and she and her mate were among those put down for spite when Amarantha first invaded. I took the boys and ran before Amarantha had everyone dragged under the mountain. I came here because it was the only place to go, and asked Tamlin to hide my boys. He did. And when I begged him to let me help in whatever small way, he gave me a position here, days before the mask that put this wretched thing on my face. So I've been here for nearly 50 years, watching as Amarantha's noose grew tighter around his neck. We set the table upright again, and both of us panted a bit as we slumped against it. He tried, Alice said. Even with her spies, he tried finding ways to break the curse, to do anything against it, against having to send his men out again to be slaughtered by humans. He thought that if the human girl loved true, then bringing her here to free him was another form of slavery. And he thought that if he did indeed fall in love with her, Amarantha would do everything she could to destroy her, as her sister had been destroyed. So he spent decades refusing to do it, to even risk it. But this winter, with months to go, he just snapped. He sent the last of his men out one by one. And they were willing. They had begged him to go all these years. Tamlin was desperate to save his people, desperate enough to risk the lives of his men, risk that human girl's life to save us. 3 days in, Andrus finally ran into a human girl in a clearing, and you killed him with hate in your heart. But I had failed them, and in doing so I damned them all. I had damned each and every person on this estate, damned Prithian itself. I was glad I was leaning against the table's edge, or else I might have slid to the floor. You could have broken it, Alice snarled, those sharp teeth mere inches from my face. All you had to do was say that you loved him. Say that you loved him and mean it with your whole useless human heart, and his power would have been freed, you stupid, stupid girl. No wonder Lucian had resented me and yet still tolerated my presence. No wonder he'd been so bitterly disappointed when I left, had argued with Tamlin to let me stay longer. I'm sorry, I said, my eyes burning. Alice snorted. Tell that to Tamlin. He had only 3 days after you left before the 49 years were over. 3 days, and he let you go. She came here with her cronies at the exact moment the 7 times 7 years were over and seized him, along with most of the court, and brought them under the mountain to be her subjects. Creatures like me are too lowly for her, though she's not above murdering us for sport. I tried not to visualize it. But what of the King of Highburn? If she's conquered Prithian for herself and stolen his spells, then does he see her as an insubordinate or as an ally? If they are on bad terms, he has made no move to punish her. For 49 years now she's held these lands in her grip. Worse, after the High Lords fell, all the wicked ones in our lands, the ones too awful even for the Night Court, flocked to her. They still do. She's offered them sanctuary. But we know she's building her army, biding her time before launching an attack on your world, armed with the most lethal and vicious fairies in Prithian and Highburn. Like the adder, I said, horror and dread twisting in my gut, and Alice nodded. In the human territory, I said, rumor claims more and more fairies have been sneaking over the wall to attack humans. And if no fairies can cross the wall without her permission, then that has to mean she's been sanctioning those attacks. And if I was right about what had happened to Claire Better and her family, then Amarantha had given the order for that, too. Alice wiped some dirt I couldn't see from the table we leaned against. I would not be surprised if she has sent her minions into the human realm to investigate your strengths and weaknesses in anticipation of the destruction she one day hopes to cause. This was worse. So much worse than I had thought when I warned Nesta and my family to stay on alert and leave at the slightest sign of trouble. I felt sick to think of what kind of company Tamlin was keeping. Sick at the thought of him being so desperate, so stricken by guilt and grief over having to sacrifice his sentries and never being able to tell me. And he'd let me go. Let all their sacrifices, let Andrus's sacrifice, be in vain. He'd known that if I remained, I would be at risk of Amarantha's wrath, even if I freed him. I can't protect myself against them, against what's happening in Prythian. Even if we stood against the blight, they would hunt you down. She would find a way to kill you. I remembered that pathetic effort to flatter me upon my arrival, and then he'd given up on it, on any attempt to win me when I'd seemed so desperate to get away, to never talk to him. But he'd fallen in love with me despite all that, known I'd loved him, and let me go with days to spare. He had put me before his entire court, before all of Prythian. If Tamlin were freed, if he had his full powers, I said, staring at a blackened bit of wall, would he be able to destroy Amarantha? I don't know. She tricked the High Lords through cunning, not force. Magic's a specific kind of thing. It likes rules, and she manipulated them too well. She keeps their powers locked up inside herself, as if she can't use them, or can access very little of them at least. She has her own deadly powers, yes. So if it came down to a fight... But is he stronger? I started wringing my hands. He's a High Lord, Alice replied, as if that were answer enough. But none of that matters now. He's to be her slave, and we're all to wear these masks until he agrees to become her lover. Even then, he'll never regain his full powers, and she'll never let those under the mountain go. I pushed off the table and squared my shoulders. How do I get under the mountain? She clicked her tongue. You can't go under the mountain. No human who goes in ever comes out. I squeezed my fists so hard that my nails bit into my flesh. How do I get there? It's suicide. She'll kill you, even if you get close enough to see her. Amarantha had tricked him. She had hurt him so badly, hurt them all so badly. You're a human, Alice went on, standing as well. Your flesh is paper thin. Amarantha must also have taken Lucian. She had carved out Lucian's eye and scarred him like that. Did his mother grieve for him? You were too blind to see Tamlin's curse, Alice continued. How do you expect to face Amarantha? You'll make things worse. Amarantha had taken everything I wanted, everything I finally dared desire. Show me the way, I said, my voice trembling, but not with tears. No. Alice slung her satchel over a shoulder. Go home. I'll take you as far as the wall. There's naught to be done now. Tamlin will remain her slave forever, and Prythian will stay under her rule. That's what fate dealt. That was what the eddies of the cauldron decided. I don't believe in fate, nor do I believe in some ridiculous cauldron. She shook her head again, her wild brown hair like glistening mud in the dim light. Take me to her, I insisted. If Amarantha ripped out my throat, at least I would die doing something for him. At least I would die trying to fix the destruction I hadn't prevented, trying to save the people I'd doomed. At least Tamlin would know it was for him, and that I loved him. Alice studied me for a moment before her eyes softened. As you wish.
All right. Man, that has been chapters 31 and 32. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that in today's episode as well. Oh, man. That Amaranthia girl, she is something else. And Feyre ain't having it. Feyre like, you stole my man, bitch. Oh, I'm excited to see what happens next. It seems like we're about to have a showdown, a little bit of a cat fight, you know what I mean, over our boy Tamlin. So we're going to see what happens next week. Again, hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Again, get on the Patreon, download as well as rate 5 stars. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, as well as YouTube. Appreciate you all. I'll see you on Patreon, people. I'll see you tomorrow. Everybody else, I'll see you on Sunday. So, love you guys all, and peace.